how can we incorporate a system that helps to develop the world, and not just like the buzzwords that we've always heard, like, player driven world, and all these like living, breathing, right? Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And then you get in and it's just like, no, I'm on another theme park ride. Like, I'm going from point A to point B, and then those previous stations don't matter in my experience. But like, how can we keep the world changing? And Nodes was one of those systems that actually I had incorporated in a previous.
Such a good idea.
I don't know if you guys ever play like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I'm like a huge Pathfinder fan. I love D&D 3.5, and Pathfinder does, in my opinion, did a great job of like extending that rule set. And there's a particular system or book in Pathfinder that allows you to like set up city development so that players, like during the off week, they can like message the GM. And I was often the GM for these campaigns, and so I started with the idea for Ashes of Creation actually was a custom Pathfinder campaign. So they would like send me like, hey, I'm setting up a business. I have like the leadership feat at 7th level. I've attracted this amount of followers, and I have my cohort, and they're like setting up this tavern, and I want to attract like people to my village. And I was like, all right, I'm going to create some custom rule sets around like how, village progression can work, and like, is that going to become a thriving metropolis over time, and like, how do story arcs hook into that, and quest lines
I had no idea
spawn from that based on like the location of that particular village you decided. Did you put it near like, Fanghorn Forest or something, or did you put it across the mountain? And like, how does that influence the encounters that you guys are going to have and stuff like that? So that was like the starting point for me from a design perspective on node systems. But node systems, they're not like any unique difficult technology, you know what I mean? They're utilizing existing tech, and they're relatively easy to stand up. It's really about the content, because what I've experienced, I don't know if you guys have as well, but like when you talk about sandbox games, I've always oftentimes experienced in sandbox games that it was an excuse for the developers to kind of like not create a lot of curated content, but rather rely on players to have this like player-driven mechanics, like political ones, or crafting and stuff like that, and not necessarily have to have a lot of storylines. But
I've never thought about that when it comes to sandbox games. The developers, all they do is focus on making like maybe a cool sandbox to play in, and just let the people go. And how easy that is. Like, I feel like it's way easier to build a cool sandbox than it is to like have an RPG, right? Where you have stories and quests, and I don't know. I never thought about it that way.
That was cheap, because if you're going to offer the player doors, and behind every door is just the player doing more things, and not something that's given to them as a story, as an encounter, as content per se, then it's kind of a meaningless choice. So the nodes are really just a hallway of doors. Those behind every door is a different type of content, and depending on how the communities determine which nodes they're going to progress, which cultures are the primary contributor to that, nodes reflect those cultures, nodes reflect those decisions, and it offers those doors that have then the different types of raid boss, the different spawn tables that happen, the different reward tables, organizations that get introduced, whether it be religious or guild oriented. All of these systems through the nodes,
it's really cool,
is how we kind of surface content to the players, and it's an integral component of the world's development. So standing that up was like our first objective. I think it was like back in 2017. We had our first like node experience collection, because nodes have these zones of influence around them that kind of collect player activity, whether you kill a monster, or you harvest a resource, or you craft something.
Taxes?
They do. Nodes do collect taxes. Yes. So nodes have player governments, and they have different types of elections that can exist. Right now in alpha, you're going to experience the scientific government.
Yeah, but in alpha, it was bugged, right? Like, if you set taxes for a node, it made it so you couldn't buy any items. It kind of caused a bug.
And that is essentially players become citizens. They must own property to become citizens. There's 3 ways that you can own property, whether through an instanced apartment building that the government can elect to build, static housing that exists within the node, or freehold systems that players can place down. When they have that property, they may then apply for a citizenship. You may only ever have a citizenship to one node, and that grants you certain access to different types of content wheels. Then you elect a government, and the scientific method is through democratic election. We have military nodes that actually are arena. You fight to the death for the mayor. We have religious, which is more service-oriented, kind of repeated quest completions. And then you have economic, which is kind of oligarchical, which is kind of like an oligarchy, where you kind of bid for the mayorship, and then the mayor can select the tax rate. That tax rate gets applied to merchants, that gets applied to purchasing a property, it gets applied to different services, and then a portion of those taxes actually flow up to the governing castle as well. So there's 5 regions over the primary world, and each region has a castle that has influence over the nodes, and they collect a portion of those taxes as well.
Okay, so a random person in chat actually just asked this question, so I wanted to ask you really quickly. If your friend is a very popular streamer, let's say your best friend is a really popular streamer, could you profit off of the taxes which he charges?
No. So the taxes, when applied to a node, actually are kept within the node's coffers and must be spent on specific services and or defenses that can apply to the node. So it's not like, oh, I get elected as mayor, I'm going to collect these taxes, and now I'm just going to pocket the money.
There's no corruption.
Have you considered changing that mechanic?
There's no corruption. Is that right? Wow.
Okay, to be fair, to be fair, there could be underhanded tactics that get applied. So, for example, mayors have control over setting up trade agreements. They have control over setting up caravans that transfer goods between different nodes, applying alliances or war states between the nodes. So a mayor could, let's say, for example, determine, hey, I have 2 available trade agreements that I can create with different nodes nearby. Let me talk to the mayor or the guild that's predominant there, and let me see what they're willing to provide me in order to influence what trade agreement I decide to set up. So there could be some systems that take into account a little bit of underhanded tactics there.
Well, it's just a give and take. That's really all it is. It makes perfect sense. So for anybody who's not as familiar with the node system, let's say your node is next to a mountain. What is the evolution cycle of that node?
Right. So nodes share different. In a base state, a node is not present. So like you're walking across the world, you don't see a node there. You see a landscape, you see some monsters and stuff like that. As you begin to do things and the node is collecting experience in the background, it's going to propagate or threshold up to like a crossroads. Now you're going to get some NPCs there. The NPCs are going to indicate to you what type of node it is, right? The scientific, military, are they going to be scholars? Are they going to be priests? Are they going to be military people, right? So then you're going to get an idea, okay, well, I know now what type of node this is. Do I want to continue my efforts in helping to create this node, so to speak? There's going to be new systems and services that come online. There's going to be new merchants that are there at each stage. There's going to be new quest lines, and those quest lines are going to pull from the surrounding area, right? So nodes share points of interest, right? And points of interest get placed in a form across the world. And as nodes advance, when they get to that village stage, their borders are constantly growing, and they're locking out neighboring nodes from advancing as well. So we have 103 total different nodes that will exist in the world at launch.
That's interesting.
And when they reach a certain stage,
do you guys know? I swear I listened to this in another interview, but I can't remember. Are the nodes procedurally generated, or are they pretty static? Like, do they go in and design every level of the node, or is it procedurally different each time? Like, if you were to destroy a node and then rebuild it, would it look the exact same as it did before?
They start to activate that government system, that citizenship that's at stage 3. They can go all the way up from a crossroads to an encampment, to a village, to a town, to a city, eventually a metropolis, right? And a metropolis is going to cover or have influence over 1/5 of the total world size.
You're pretty sure it's the same?
At each stage, they're then accessing and spawning new things at the nearby points of interest when their culture expands to incorporate that point of interest. So that means that quest hooks are going to relate location-wise to the nearby points of interest. So for example, if your village advances near a mountain, like you said, maybe there's going to be mines as a dungeon, or there's going to be certain types of mountainous foes that come out in it.
See, that's interesting, because there's lots of different types of nodes too. So I guess, they would have to build out the nodes so that it would be the same each time. but that it will also change with the predominant race, right? Because the node will take on the appearance of the race. And then also the node might be different if it's a different kind of node, like a scientific one, opposed to like a market one. So I wonder if they're just going to put like, here are where the walls go, and then the walls just change. And like the building layouts stay the same, but I don't know. We'll have to see how it works, but
events and try to attack
it would
the
probably
nodes
be
and disable
different,
services
at
of
least a
buildings,
little
or,
different each time.
kill certain, like a dragon, exactly right. Or if you're near a harbor, it might be a kraken. These are the types of advancements that reflect kind of the way the server's going to evolve. And the cool thing I think about cool. How nodes interface with the server progression is that each server is going to experience different types of progressions, and that's something that's cool to me too, because historically in MMOs I've played, I don't know about you guys, but like each server's the same, and the new player experience follows generally the same path that players who came before experienced. And that can be kind of cool because you have some familiarity, but at the same time, it can be a little lackluster because all the guides online, like you know exactly what you're getting into, there's no exploration, there's no adventure, there's like, all right, let me just rush through these beginning content areas.
Well, that's what roller coaster MMORPGs are, right? Like you're on a track and it's fun and exciting, and there's different turns and loops and stuff that you go through, but there's like a specific track you have to follow until you hit the end game.
And these, core quest
this will be
lines
different,
so that I can get to the
there'll be no
end
track.
Game.
It'll just be like exploring, basically.
What nodes provide is it's very likely, since it's based off player heat mapping in the world, that for the first like 6 months of a particular server's lifespan, you're going to have the majority of the large nodes exist near the starting areas. So you're not going to experience what traditionally has been a problem for MMORPGs, where like you enter the world and the biggest attraction of the MMO, which is that social interaction, is not present for you for the first 50 levels because nobody else is there, right? Like that's the crappy thing I've experienced, and like partly why I don't like to even join MMOs that launch, after 6 months. I want to be there when the party. Yeah, exactly. You're late to the party, and it's
playing a game.
And I think that's why everyone rushes to the end game too, right? It's because that's where all the people are.
On day one feels so good, man. Like it's awesome. Everybody's doing the same thing. Everybody wants to do everything. I love that. And so you're saying that each server is going to have its own different way that it evolves. So for example, like with a lot of games, like you have stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, and most servers just go through 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what you're saying is there could be stage A, B, C, or D. They're completely different directions.
And not only that, but actually those stages are regionalized. So for example, one particular region of the map might be more advanced than the far side of the map, right? So it's kind of based on how the player population moves. So for example, if there are different starting areas, like we have different starting areas based on kind of the race, because players are returning to this kind of forsaken world that's had a apocalyptic history. The primary antagonists are these kind of firstborn of the gods that turned to the dark side, and like they came and
wait, what? Is this the lore? I'm gonna go back.
If there are different starting areas, like we have different starting areas based on kind of the race, because players are returning to this kind of forsaken world that's had a apocalyptic history. The primary antagonists are these kind of firstborn of the gods that turned to the dark side, and like they came and in these harbinger comets and like landed on this planet, and they killed off the the children of the gods, the dwarves, the elves, the humans, and the orcs, and then they evacuated this planet of Vera to Sanctus and through the portals, and now they're returning thousands of years later because the goddess of creation's avatar is this phoenix, and the spark of life is kind of bringing these people back to the world, and now you're rediscovering what was your lost ancestors' home, and these adversaries that are just filled with corruption are like perverting every part of the landscape. So based on how player population looks and where players choose to start, because you can select a race like human, but not necessarily have to start at the human starting area. You can choose to start at a different portal because you're coming from.
Whoa, that is so cool. So the idea is we are returning to a planet that our ancestors once lived on. So it'd be kind of cool, like let's say, because I'm kind of leaning towards orc right now. I don't know, it kind of changes with every day that passes, but let's say I'm an orc character. Then I come back to this land of Vera, and I see these ruins, like, of my forefathers, these orc ruins, and I have to, like, discover how they were destroyed, discover these, like, old gods that he's talking about. That maybe he didn't say old gods. What did he say? Yeah, these, like, ancient creatures and gods that destroyed my forefathers. Like, that's an interesting lore setup.
Sanctus, right?
It allows for a lot of exploration too, and like further expansions, expanding on that idea, finding new areas that were like, what if a mountain opens up all of a sudden and we found this like Dwarven ruin inside that was once destroyed? I don't know.
And based on how different server populations evolve, will determine how that heat map of node progression exists in that particular server, and it's going to completely change the dynamic of what that world looks like from a regionality standpoint.
That's really
and
cool.
One of the things I was saying was like, that problem of entering into that empty, landscape of starting areas isn't going to be present in Ashes, because those starting areas will likely be the most advanced nodes over the first 6 months, let's say, of a server's lifetime. So as players join in, they're going to be in a highly populated area where end game players or higher level players are coming back to that node to receive the quest lines, to participate in organizations. That's their guild hall location. It's like you're going to be thrust into the middle of this highly social environment where players are all around you while you're doing your early level stuff. And actually that early level stuff is going to be compounded by the opportunities you now have at this node that's been established nearby that people in a linear history didn't get to experience when they first started the game. It's going to be a completely different experience for players 6 months down the road than it will be for players who were there on day one. And I think that's a cool kind of history that is unique. It's not the same process every time a new player joins. Exactly.
I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to be hanging out around the main towns at the beginning. I kind of want to just get my guild and run out to this far reach and just totally dominate an area, try to level it up. Maybe this is a stupid idea, but I kind of like the idea of not being with this giant crowded area of people and just going out exploring, starting your own little settlement.
So different servers.
I was gonna say the same thing as you, Rich. I think
that you can RP in different places on different servers.
Yeah, and it's like each server has its own story, and so if you're playing on one server and you want to reroll on another server, you're gonna have a slightly different Ashes of Creation experience.
Exactly.
Wow. That's
okay,
cool.
So I want to do a little thought experiment.
The replayability.
This one might be a little bit tricky because everything with the nodes sounds very exciting to a player like me as well. But let's pretend. Let's pretend for a second that I'm an idiot and I'm not really great at understanding systems or playing video games in general. And I'm just walking through the world and the nodes are... Can you be a player and not really understand the nodes and still enjoy the game and just take it as it comes?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, when you think about what is your normal MMO experience that we have as MMO, okay, so the MMO player base is typically an aging demographic. Unfortunately, right now, over the last decade, newer generation of gamers have joined, different genres, and they didn't get the experience of being a part of a major MMORPG launch and that unique social component that MMOs provide, and so they don't really know what it's in my opinion, they don't really know what it's like to be part of that. That standard kind of experience is all right, I'm getting in, I have my adventuring class, I'm going to go out there and fight monsters, I'm going to progress, I'm going to acquire gear, I'm going to make friends, I'm going to go from these kind of quest points to quest points, and I'm going to explore this world that I've never seen before, and I'm going to come across materials in the world that I want to gather and then sell into the economy. All of those systems exist without nodes progressing. So that normal kind of progression will exist. The thing about nodes is as you're doing that normal progression, the nodes are growing with you based on every one of those types of actions, right? They're collecting that experience that you collect as well, and that all the other players around collect. So it'll be relatively easy for crossroads to start spawning all over the world. And then it'll be, a little bit more difficult for encampments to spawn, and maybe a little bit more difficult for villages, and so on and so forth. So like, you can expect on day 1 crossroads are going to be present immediately. You can expect probably on day 2 that some encampments are going to spawn up, and then maybe it'll take like day 5 or 7 for some villages to spawn, and then maybe it'll take a couple of weeks for like a town to get up there, and then maybe it'll take a month for a city, and then a month and a half for a metropolis, right? Like, these are the types of ideas we have for how node progression will work and complement what the traditional, game loop of an MMORPG is. It's not to necessarily invent the wheel. Look, we want to have some familiarity as MMORPG gamers. I mean, that's what makes MMOs. So you keep that familiarity, and then you innovate in ways that complement. And that's how the node systems kind of do that.
Yeah,
that's pretty interesting, because like from a crossroads to a metropolis, that's like 2.5, like I just did the math real quick, but that's like 2.5, 3 months for a crossroads to get to a metropolis. Like, that's a lot of time investment. I think people will really get attached to the town that they identify with.